Back in 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted that the productivity gains that people at the time were already seeing were enough that soon the work week would be shortened to something like 15 hours a week, and that we would all have much more leisure time. But of course, since then, we most certainly have not shortened the work week to 15 hours, even though productivity has continued to grow dramatically. And in fact, despite that productivity growth, most people in the world still live in poverty. And the workers whose labor is the source of all that productivity have seen their wages rise much less than the gains they produced. And work weeks have, in fact, become longer, not shorter. So we want to ask, what is productivity for? And that's a question that we have to answer before we can know if we should be trying to increase productivity. And if it turns out that we should be trying to increase productivity, how we should be trying to do that. Because increasing productivity will always come at a cost, and we just can't know if those costs are worth it until we're clear, what we hope to gain from these increases in productivity. We might really wonder what happens to human life when we try to increase performance at any cost. What really are those costs? And people are not machines. We can't just upgrade a person or overclock a person, as we say sometimes when we're talking about computers, in order to sort of wring every last drop of performance out of them. When you extract more productivity, that does come at a cost to the person. And it's obvious that that's so if the productivity is generated by just having that person work at the same rate for a longer time. Extra hours of work are hours that person doesn't have available for other aspects of their life. And the extra hours of work may further limit what that person can do with their non-working hours by keeping them from being available at particular times or by leaving them exhausted. And so maybe we think, right, yeah, that's why we'd want to increase productivity without increasing the amount of time worked. That's the point of these technological interventions. But that kind of productivity gain isn't free either. And we need to think about what the impacts on human life are like if we bring these technologies to the table. We know that if you overclock a machine, it will run hotter. And if you try to do it for too long, then that machine will fail. And using technology to overclock a worker, as it were, could likewise cause the workers' system to fail in similar ways. We don't even know what that might look like or whether or how it could be fixed if it did. So that's a serious risk to take, especially, again, if we don't have a clear rationale for the goal of increasing productivity in the first place. But even if this kind of technological intervention doesn't sort of break the people on whom it's used, it's not obvious that we should be squeezing all the slack out of a worker's system. I mean, if it's possible for a person to, maybe in some limited way, accomplish more by using these kinds of technologies, why should we think that capability should be deployed for work at all? This is where we start to think about the kind of ethical questions around the use of this technology. Is first, what are the risks for the people that we're using it on? And then, what kind of choices might they make instead? So if we want to think about the real ethical implications of using these kinds of technologies, we need to ask ourselves, what might a worker choose to do with this kind of potential increased capability that they have? I mean, maybe, a worker would rather be able to use this kind of ability to help their children with their schoolwork or pursue a hobby or something else. Or maybe they would just like to have kind of this capability in reserve to kind of make them able to handle the sort of crises that modern life often just surprises us with. So, we might think at the very least that it should be up to the worker how this kind of new potential is used. So one of the key ethical questions is really, who gets to decide whether and how to deploy these technologies? And thinking about whether or how to deploy these technologies has to be done with a view to the needs and interests and values of the workers and the people who will be the ones using these technologies to make sure that they're the ones who will benefit. If we just continue the historical pattern of productivity increases that don't increase workers' compensation or decrease their work time in proportion to those gains, we should ask, why should workers consent, especially when there are unknown risks to using such technologies? I think there are real risks that these technologies, if used, will increase inequality, and maybe especially in developing countries. Historically, not only have productivity gains failed to relieve poverty, but they've actually accompanied increases in inequality. So we might, it would make sense to suspect that technologically produced productivity gains of the kind we're talking about will do the same thing. And furthermore, we might worry that, workers at the bottom of the income and wealth scales are the most vulnerable, and we might expect them to be the most likely to have this kind of technology imposed on them. So the kind of inequality we need to worry about is not merely financial inequality, economic inequality. We might very well worry that that the existence and temptation to use these technologies will also increase the vulnerability of the most vulnerable among us already. And so there are serious questions here about using technology to increase productivity. And those questions start with this question about why we'd want to. And they continue with the questions I was articulating about, who would be in control of such technologies and how the people who'd bear the risks of these technologies would come to benefit from their use. But there's really, I think, at the heart of this question about whether the gains that we're imagining from these technologies could be such that they don't follow the historical pattern where the gains all flow to a few people at the top, but rather that they manage to improve the lives of everyone, and especially those who are currently the least advantaged by the system as it works. Otherwise, it's hard to argue that we should chase the kind of productivity gains that these technologies promise, because we should probably put our resources and energy into finding ways to improve the lot of the people who are the least well off, not the ones that are the most well off.